First Paw Media. You are listening to Mushing on First Paw Media. Visit our website at mushing.com.
Hello and welcome everybody to our continuing coverage of the 2024 Iditarod. I am Robert and I am here with my co-host Michele, and we are the Burled Arch Podcast. It has been a busy day on the trail. I'm looking forward to getting into it. But first, Michele, how's it going today?
It's been a wonderful day here in the Mat-Su Valley. We had bluebird skies, got a lot done. Let's get to it.
So in first place currently is Travis Beals. He is at mile 545, followed by Matt Hall, Dallas Seavey, Pete Kaiser, and Jesse Holmes. And pulling up the rear, we have Bryce Mumford in the Red Lantern position, Josh Robbins, Lauro Eklund, Connor McMahon, and Jeff Reed at the back of the pack. And interestingly enough, we have a dog sled race going on. Overnight, a lot of movement has happened, and we have some important news about the first to the Yukon Award, which was Nick Petit. We're going to talk a little bit about that. We're going to talk about some crazy stories out there on the race, in particular with Paige Drobny and Ryan Reddington, and just a heck of a lot going on, Michele. Before we jump into our stories, what do you think about how this race is shaping up here on the 5th and 6th day, going into the 6th day as we move into the evening?
Well, Robert, I just want to say that I've been extremely impressed with the dog care. By this point of the race in races past, we're looking at a few more dogs returned for various reasons, if I'm not mistaken. And so the mushers are running very strategically, holding on to more dogs. I saw in a quick look, we've only got a few mushers with 10 or 11 dogs. Otherwise, everybody's running 12, 14, 15 dogs. And so that says a lot about this field and how they are managing their dogs along the trail.
For sure. And that's what it's all about, at least on our camp. It is definitely all about the dogs, all about the dog care. There are so many human stories out there, and there is just not enough talk about the dogs because, unfortunately, they are tough to cover. They are tough to get interviews from, aren't they?
I don't know. We've got a few talkers out in our kennel.
So let's jump into the first story of the evening, and that happened overnight after we were off the air last night. Nick Petit pulled into Ruby, that first checkpoint on the river, and he was the winner of that first to the Yukon meal. And it consisted of ribeye, scallops, a nice vegetable medley, if you will, and a very nice creme brulee. And he shared it with a mutual friend of ours, Nate Titus. He's been a longtime listener and supporter of us here on the channel. He is a resident of Ruby and a heck of a nice guy. And just a very quick note about Mr. Titus. He helped us out on numerous occasions when we scheduled our Serum Run expedition there at the start of the Yukon. And did you know that he runs the search and rescue outfit from that neck of the woods? So he has a lot going on, and him and another one of our mutual friends, Billy Honey, they have Ruby down pat, don't they?
They certainly do. As a matter of fact, when you guys were out there traversing on the Serum Run, I'm just going to do a little side story here, you guys. During that year, Billy Honey was my contact in Ruby. And in that village, he was giving me not only play-by-play, moment-to-moment updates on where you guys were and how you were coming across the river there. He was very concerned about when you guys had the overflow incident and you guys were in chest deep overflow at negative 55 degrees. He was so concerned, as a matter of fact, he sent Mr. Titus out to locate you guys and help you guys get into Ruby the quickest and safest way possible, which was highly appreciated by myself because I had no idea where you guys were at, what was going on. And Mr. Titus did contact me, let me know he had eyes on you guys. He said, you can't miss that orange snow machine.
For sure. And just a quick note about Ruby. Michele said earlier in our coverage this year that Yetna Station was on her bucket list to go out to Yetna Station, and we did that on Sunday on the Iditarod restart day. But Ruby is one of those very cool checkpoints, one of my favorite ones that I have visited. And it's interesting because it's just this little community literally in the middle of nowhere. And what's interesting about it is as you're coming off the Yukon, you have to take a very steep left turn up a very steep hill into the little community there. We spent 2 nights at I guess it's the middle school, maybe the high school there. Such welcoming people there. What a cool place to visit. And I think, Michele, if we get a chance, we are going to have to visit Ruby. I know it's at least a flight. I don't think we could take our snow machines there and be back in a day or two. It would be a several day trip to get there by snow machine. But I think that should be on your bucket list.
I think it is.
So as we mentioned, Nick Petit was the first to the Yukon and received that award there. And what's interesting to note is this is no longer put on by the folks that run the kitchen at the lakefront, which used to be known as the Millennium. It is now run by the chefs that have some of the best restaurants in Anchorage. They run the South Restaurant, they run the Snow City Cafe, and they run the Crush Wine Bar. This is really good food. I think you and I have eaten at every one of these places in our time here in Anchorage. And I am one to say there's not a whole lot of good restaurants, but the folks at those restaurants do what they do best, don't they?
They certainly do. And we have great chefs up here in Alaska, you guys, but getting fresh food is always one of those hard things to come by. And restaurants, while they do try to offer us good flavors and new fare, they just don't seem to make it all the time. Yeah,
and Nick said that vegetables are hard to come by on the Iditarod, so he had a couple of helpings of salad and the vegetables and enjoyed himself. And remember that this same meal, at least in the lakefront days, was offered to that musher again for him and a guest at a later date. So they can enjoy it on the trail, but they can also enjoy it at a later time. And I would assume that that is the same thing going on. But in Nick's case, he ended up taking his 24-hour rest in Ruby. So he had plenty of time to enjoy that meal, and the dogs were able to rest. And I believe he's still there at the time of recording. And one thing that he does for his dogs is he is feeding them a mixture of horse meat and pork belly. That's a heck of a combination, isn't it?
Wow. Yeah, it sure is. Now, Robert, please refresh my memory. Didn't Nick win this coveted meal last year as well?
I don't think he won it last year, but he has been the first to the Yukon 4 times in 17, 18, 19, and 24. So no, he did not win this last year.
So I think that he must have been just tummy growling out of cripple because he turned up the heat.
He did.
On the trail and got himself into Ruby. He must have been hungry.
So one other thing about this First to the Yukon Award, for many years when the Lakefront and the Millennium were doing this award, they would give out $3,000 in $1 bills. And I know that several years ago, they weren't able to do that. I don't know if they were unable to do that big of a sponsorship or whatever, but Scott Jansen, otherwise known as the Mushin Mortician, put up that $3,000 purse. And since he is a mortician / undertaker, he delivered that $3,000 in a little wooden coffin. And I love telling that story. Scott is an amazing person in the local community for our races. He does a heck of a lot. I know as a board member for Chugiak Dog Mushers here in the Anchorage area, he does a lot of support for our races. He gives up a lot of the big purses. And that guy, he is not mushing dogs like he used to be. I know he's down in Las Vegas or Louisiana or Arizona right now running race cars. And I know that he and Nick often do that together. And that's where they met off trail, if I should say. And there's also that Lance Mackey connection as well.
Absolutely. And, he's got some of the cutest little grandkids. I know that firsthand because I helped them train their family dog.
So yeah, connections run deep in the Iditarod community. It's always cool to share those stories because these are the stories you don't necessarily hear in the normal media. You having that firsthand knowledge of Scott and his son and wife and kids as well.
It was his daughter's dog. Yeah. No, they're a fantastic family. They really are all about community and building it up and making sure that things endure.
So, like we said, a lot going on all over the trail. At least everybody is rocking and rolling as we're recording here on day 5 / going into day 6. We have no scratches, which is really, really cool at this juncture. Usually we've had a couple of people that have had scratch for one reason or another. We're still going strong. I know for a lot of people, they say don't jinx it, but we just do the reporting.
I think that we're not jinxing it, Robert. I think that we're giving props to this field of mushers.
Yeah, they're doing very good, especially those guys at the back of the pack. They're really holding it together, and for many of them, they're traveling together. People are taking care of each other, etc.
Now, Robert, wasn't there something that happened last night on the trail out of Cripple up to Ruby? When I got up this morning, I noticed that everybody that had been still down in McGrath, everybody was up and out and on their way to Cripple. And now we've got the majority of them up and out and almost to Ruby. We've only got 9 mushers hanging back at Cripple. But I heard something happened to one of the mushers between Cripple and Ruby in the middle of the night.
I think it was coming into Cripple, and evidently I just heard about this right before we went on air. We were chatting with our friends Richard and Patty. If you remember, they were our guests last Friday night, and they were sharing stories of what they heard today on Insider. They have a chance to listen to all the interviews and watch all the videos, but evidently Ryan Reddington, the reigning champ, had fallen asleep and fallen off of his sled and into a snowbank, and Paige Drobny strolled up upon him and picked him up and gave him a ride into the checkpoint. And there his dogs were, I assume the dogs were waiting. I'm sure we can get clarification of this, but that is what we talked about several times before, that sportsmanship and that camaraderie that we have out there. And remember that there is no penalty for outside assistance if it's another musher assisting another musher. So if that happens, that is perfectly legal, perfectly fine, and of course is to be expected. So I guess that Paige gave Ryan a ride into the checkpoint and all is well. But that just goes back to sportsmanship. You don't see that a lot in other sports, especially professional sports, where it's usually all about the individual team or the individual accolades or whatever. Most of the time, they don't go out of the way like they do in dog mushing, do they?
No, I happen to agree. But, I got to tell you, Robert, this year feels different to me. It really does. I mean, of course, every one of the mushers are competitive. The dogs are competitive. But I'm really feeling a sense of community around Iditarod this year. Are you feeling the same way?
I think they're doing great. I think there's a lot of stories developing. Of course, there's a lot of news and a lot of riffraff going on. excuse me.
Manufactured drama.
Manufactured drama. But what is sports without drama? As they used to say back in the old days on ABC Wild World of Sports, they used to say the thrill of victory and the agony of defeat. And a lot of times that agony of defeat did not come from losing, but it was the challenges faced on that sporting event, arena, whatever they're doing. And Iditarod is no exception. There's always storylines to talk about. There's always news to cover for sure. And I want to make sure that we have covered all of the news before we jump over to our Musher interview clip. What else do we have, Michele?
I'm just wondering why we can't get Mutual of Omaha as a sponsor.
That goes way back in the day.
Way back.
When that organization used to sponsor those Wild World of
The
Sports.
Animal Kingdom, brought to you by Mutual of Omaha.
There you go. So, Michele, any other stories before we drop this first clip?
No, I've just been really enjoying our time together doing this podcast. We hope you guys understand and appreciate Robert and I's camaraderie, how we speak to each other, and just how excited we are to share our points of view with you guys about the race and what's going on. He brings you guys a mushers aspect, while I try to bring you the wife aspect as well as a handler's aspect. And there's just a lot going on out there.
For sure. And tonight we're going to drop a clip of Will Rhodes and a little bit of backstory here. Will and Brenda, Will Rhodes and Brenda Mackey, we talked about, I believe it was last night when they talked about communicating with each other on the trail. And I really like these guys. I have been friends with these guys for several years now. In fact, I think more than half of our dogs are from Will and Brenda. So obviously we have a little bit of a personal connection with these guys. We're probably watching them run several brothers and sisters of dogs that we have right here in our kennel. And these guys really fly under the radar. They have an exceptional team. They have an exceptional dog care. Here in Alaska, if they're racing, they're typically up there in the top 2 or 3. If they have not won a lot of these local races, I think that these guys have a really good up-and-coming kennel. I know that Will is a rookie this year, but they have so much experience. They spend so much time on the trails training their dogs. So this is going to be an interesting story to hear. It's only a few minutes long. And remember, these interviews were captured by Michele at the Iditarod restart before all of the craziness of the race started. So here we go.
How's it going, Will?
It's going well. How are you doing, Michele?
I'm good. This is Will Rhodes, and Will was just doing his vet check as I walked up, and they're all finished now. Everybody took their little bathroom test, and they're all going to do just fine. That's always a nervous time, isn't it? The dogs seem a little bit off when they've got those baggies wrapped around them and things like that. Thank goodness they don't do that to us, Will.
Yeah, well, I guess not until the right time. So.
That's right. What are you most looking forward to today?
Getting on the trail is absolutely what I'm most looking forward to. The nerves kind of dissipate once you're behind your dog team and you're on the task at hand. So leading up to it, you just have a lot of time to think and go over details over and over again, and that all ends once you hit the trail. So that's what I'm looking forward to.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, listeners out there might not know this, but our personal kennel, we've got quite a few of your guys' dogs, and they spent the last 6 weeks teaching students from UAA and APU all about the sport of dog mushing, and we want to say thank you for that opportunity. Your dogs are awesome, and we really have a great time with them. I want to let everybody know out there, though, your dogs are very friendly, and see, they have so much personality. Who is your favorite dog on your team?
Well, that's an impossible question. I have many dogs that are favorites. It's easy to, I guess, my older veteran dogs. So I have two 8-year-olds, a 7-year-old, two 7-year-olds, a 6-year-old. The ones that have been with me and around around the state racing are, my favorites. I've spent so much time with them, and I've raised all of them up from puppies through adulthood. But, if I have to give you some names, Apollo and Monarch, Lusa, Luke, and Skipper, Pilot, some of my favorite dogs.
Sounds like
yeah,
the majority of your team.
Well,
That's wonderful.
it's a hard question for a dog musher. Because,
I know. I do it on purpose. I do this on purpose.
Yeah, right.
It's hard. It's a hard question, but honestly, all of the dogs are our favorite dogs, right? And I'm looking more for which one kind of do you feel like you have a good bond with, like your heart dog, right?
Right.
And so all of us have that.
I'd say Lusa probably is very dear to my heart. Little female that's a solid leader, has finished in races in lead for me over and over again, and never quits. And we have a pretty intense bond. So Lusa is probably, we could call her my favorite for the purposes of this interview here.
Dog, right?
There you go.
Yeah, you're going to have such a great time. Last question I have for you is, which checkpoint are you looking forward to getting to?
Is Nome a check? No, that's the finish. How about safety? I'd like to be in safety. I'm really looking forward to Unalakleet too. I think the running down the coast is going to be quite interesting, and look forward to getting to the coast. Quite challenging from there on in, and you're 2/3 the way done with the race. So Unalakleet's a big milestone location, I think, to reach. So I'm looking forward to that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Will, thank you so much for the time.
You bet.
I think you're going to have a great race, and I wish you luck.
Thank you so much, Michele.
Thank you.
So, guys, I hope you like that. It gives you a little bit of interesting perspective on what people are going through at that restart. In particular, the P test from the dogs. I know that we talked about that in our first couple of days coverage. So definitely a cool interview for sure. We have several more of these to do. We're going to try to drop them one a night as long as Michele and I can be at the same place at the same time. I think for the rest of our coverage, we will be hosting right here in the Mushing Magazine / Dogworks Radio World headquarters, and we can drop these clips as we're going. So with that, so this show doesn't get crazy long, I know that there are some shows out there that are well over an hour or two. We're going to try to keep this a little bit concise, and we're going to jump right into our musher profile of the evening. I would willing to bet that not a lot of people have heard about this young lady. Who do we have?
We have Erin Altemus this evening. And you know what, Robert? That is the entire reason why I try to find information about some of these more obscure mushers, whether they're rookies or returning veterans that haven't hit the trail in over 20 years. I want people to see what they can find out about mushers that they might not have heard about. We want to create new fan bases. So Erin and her husband have been racing dogs, believe it or not, for 12 years, even though she is a rookie in this year's Iditarod. She learned to run dogs at the YMCA camp in Minogen, which is in Minnesota, which is where they are from. They call the Gunflint Trails their home trails. Robert, are you familiar with those trails?
Very familiar. I cut my teeth on a lot of those trails up in northern Minnesota.
Anything that you recall that was really special about the Gunflint Trail?
The weather will smack you in the face all along those trails up near Duluth. That lake force effect, as they say, can make for some very interesting mushing. And I think it does a heck of a lot of good training for these up-and-coming guys that end up doing Iditarod.
Absolutely. Now, they call their kennel Sawtooth Racing, and Erin does a great job. She's blogging on there. She's got some fabulous photos of their dogs and their puppies and all of the things that they do, including a nice photo of their daughter. Really just a wholesome family trying to make their way in this crazy world we call dog mushing. So the Glenflint Trail System, Robert, is that featured in part of the Iron Will movie?
I would bet it is. I know that right along that area is. I think that a lot of the bear grease is held up on that trail, and I think probably there is a trail or two that is on Iron Will in that area.
That is so cool. So you guys, you need to check out sawtoothracing.weebly.com if you want to learn a little bit more about Erin and her dog team. Now, I did notice that Erin has a few interviews out there. She has her blog called Northern Wilds Magazine, which you can find at northernwilds.com. She is a nurse as well as a dog musher, and she's having a fairly good race, wouldn't you say, Robert?
Yeah, she's at mile 439, currently running as we speak, 7.7 miles an hour. So she is not quite to the halfway point, but I would bet by the time we are on the air tomorrow, she will be on the Yukon and moving on.
Right. And it looks like she is quite the little celebrity out of Grand Marais, Minnesota. She's been featured on lots of news casts there. And I wish her luck on this race. And she is going to go far.
So let's talk a little bit about that Yukon River Run. That's going to be the title of tonight's podcast, the Mighty Yukon. I always call it that as we're going through because it truly is mighty. It is well over a mile wide in some points. I know Michele hearkened it to thinking about what the Big Sioux looks like in regard to the Mississippi River. It is at least twice as wide as the Big Sioux that these mushers found out about the first night of the race. This is a very intimidating run for a lot of mushers, not necessarily because it's difficult, because it's really just running down one of the major highways in Alaska, and I will talk about why they call it that in a minute. But it is just a monotonous run for these guys. When we were doing our Serum Run trip a few years ago, I think we were on the Yukon for 3 straight days, and I know that mushers are going a lot faster than we were. So I would bet that most of them will be on it for well over a day or longer. It is a very long stretch from Ruby up till Nualto and then on over where they go through the Caltag portage. So it is a long run on the river. And from a musher's perspective, the dogs just get tired of seeing the same thing for mile after mile after mile. There's literally nothing except a wide swath of frozen river. There are no trees. There are very few obstacles without the errant iceberg, if you will, that jumbled ice that they get. But it's just 1 mile after another. It can be very cold. There can be overflow. There can be all sorts of weather conditions going on. But otherwise, it's just a very long expanse of time to spend out there just sort of chugging away. And I mentioned that it was one of the highways of Alaska, and that's truly what it is. A lot of our rivers and our trails are how all of these communities are interconnected. We talked about how Ruby is connected to other communities along the way. And what they do is they take their snow machines, and much more back in the day than today, they take their dog teams from community to community and see family and go to the store and doctor's appointments and school and all these other things. They use these trails as their highways. And for dog teams, obviously, it's not nearly as fast as it is by snow machine, but you can really pick up and boogie down these trails by snow machine. A lot of the Iron Dog Trail is on these trails, and they're going upwards to 60, 70, 80 miles an hour down these rivers. And not only is that very fast, but it also can be very, very dangerous. We've heard the stories about mushers getting hit by snow machines on the Yukon and other rivers in our community. So it is a very dangerous portion of the trail for that reason alone. I know several years ago, the stories with Ali Zirkle and Jeff King with the drunk musher on the Yukon River and them getting run over by that individual. And when we were doing our Serum Run trip, the checkpoint just ahead of where the front runners are in Galena, we had one of our mushers get hit by a snow machine and ended up breaking, I believe it was her femur, and she had to be airlifted out. I think she was airlifted to Nome from there, maybe Fairbanks, I don't recall, with a broken femur. So accidents happen along this stretch of the river because it's literally just an expanse in the middle of nowhere. And when you are a dog team that is poorly visible in the middle of the night, and high speeds and unfortunately alcohol and other substances come into play, it can make for a very dangerous situation. So the mighty Yukon is mighty for many reasons. The expanse, the speed, all sorts of reasons why this is a very interesting portion of the trail. And as I mentioned a couple of days ago, the race of thirds, this is truly that second third of the race where we go through the mountains and the woods and all of that on that first third, through the burn and all those historic aspects of the trail. The Yukon is that as well on a much different grand scale for sure. Michele, anything else about the Yukon?
Yeah, I want to kind of caveat off of what you just said. Now, in years past, the mushers have been a little bit more spread out than I'm noticing this year. And maybe that's just my layman's observations, but I really see the mushers kind of traveling more in groups, almost pairs.
That can be expected. That typically happens pretty much during the whole Iditarod trails. You'll have groups of mushers traveling relatively close together, and that does not mean that, hey, they are traveling neck and neck, side by side together. There's typically several miles spread between teams because it is not fun to travel right next to another dog team for a very long time because the dogs get up on each other, they want to pass, and it's this whole game of leapfrogging back and forth. It is not a fun experience by any stretch of the imagination, but it is good to know that you're traveling relatively close with other people. You can support each other. You can give motivation to each other. You can spend time in checkpoints together. You can have that camaraderie on the trail. But I know just in traveling and training and other smaller races, I do not want to be traveling with somebody for long periods of time because it just is not a fun experience to be doing so.
Well, I made that observation, Robert, based on what I'm noticing on the miles. Like we're talking about Pete Kaiser at 531, while Jesse Holmes is at 528, or like Hunter and Millie are both at mile 500. Now, I know it's all relative, but it appears to me like more of the mushers are staying within 5 miles of each other for the majority of this entire race, which that's what I was finding fairly phenomenal.
Yeah, and again, putting this into perspective, I think at last report I read that there was 142 miles separating the first team and the last team. And I want you guys to think, as you're listening, wherever you're listening from, exactly how far 142 miles is. In our perspective, 142 miles from here is from our studio, our home right here in Willow, to Anchorage and back. So that is about 138 miles, I believe it is. So that is a long way when you think about it. In other terms, that is pretty much from Duluth, Minnesota to the Twin Cities. That is from Chicago to about Indianapolis. That is New York.
Seattle to Portland?
Seattle to Portland is 169 miles. It is New York City, I believe, to maybe Philadelphia. So think about that wherever you're listening. It is, I would say it is from Tampa to about the Everglades or so if you're listening in the Southeast. It is Atlanta to about Ocala, Florida, so quite a bit of distance there. Atlanta to Raleigh, North Carolina. That's another perspective on 142 miles or so. I guess you guys can see that I know my geography pretty well.
Notice that he did not say San Diego to anywhere, because anywhere from San Diego, you're going to run into traffic. So
yeah, it would it would be. So it would be from about San Francisco to I don't know where. I guess
maybe Sacramento or San Jose, but that's still tight with traffic.
Yeah, it would take you that long. So 142 miles is still a heck of a long way by a stretch of imagination. It is much further in the middle of Alaska, in the middle of winter.
So I did the math, Robert. There are exactly 128 miles between Travis Beals and Bryce Mumford.
So
now.
Thinking about that, so if it is the distance between Seattle and Portland, which minus 40 miles or so, so imagine if I was sitting in Seattle and Michele was sitting in Portland, and I said, okay, I am here, Michele. When are you going to be here? And
this actually happened, everyone. He landed in Portland on a flight, and I landed in Seattle, and I had to wait for him to come get me in the rental car.
Yeah, and it was about a 3.5, 4 hour drive with traffic, but it's still a long way. So even though they appear close on the tracker, 128 miles is still a pretty good distance. Traveling at 8 miles an hour, what is that? About 13 or 14 hours difference or so of constant running. So there's a lot of I did a math coming up here in this end of this episode for sure. So what's going to happen between now and tomorrow? I would say that everybody will be on the Yukon or off. The front runners should be arriving at those ladder checkpoints in...
Do you think we'll have mushers in Unalakleet by tomorrow evening ready for pizza pies?
Nope. I don't think anybody will be there quite yet, because they still have to go make that hard right turn up through the Kaltag Portage, which I believe is about 100 miles or so from Nualto and Kaltag. So it's a pretty good distance. I would say they will not be there by this time tomorrow, but pretty dang close.
Now, Robert, you have some familiarity with the portage. What is problematic about the portage?
Well, it is about 90 miles or so of overland trail. That's where the tripod cabin is. That's where Old Woman cabin is. There's a lot of history going through there. There could be a heck of a lot of snow. All sorts of weather, because it literally is that overland passage from what we call the coast to, the sea ice portion of the trail and all that. And then, of course, this other 2/3 of the race as they're going. So
Anna Barrington told me that was where she wanted to get to, tripod.
Well, we'll see. I think she should do just fine. And we do have an interview from Anna. Maybe we'll drop that one tomorrow. We'll see. Otherwise, we're running a little bit long on time, so we will see you guys tomorrow. Goodbye.
Nobody covers dog sledding like Mushing from First Paw Media. Our team of athletes, volunteers, race organizers, and mushers like Robert and Michele Forto brings you closer to the sport. If it's happening, we are there. Live from the qualifying races in January and February, the Iditarod in March, and in the summer, Mushing takes you on the road with our team and trail tour. We connect you with a history of the sport, in-depth interviews with the top mushers, and great storytelling and breaking news all year long. Follow on mushing.com.